The high desert wind carried dust across the empty plains as Marcus Holloway guided his horse along the ridge of his property. He'd been ranching this land for 30 years, and he knew every gulch and mesa like the lines on his own weathered hands. But the figure moving near the old creek bed caught his attention. Someone was there, on the edge of his property where the fence had long since fallen away. Through his binoculars, he could make out a woman, maybe in her late 20s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was struggling with what looked like pieces of rotted wood, trying to lean them against each other to form some kind of structure. A small green tent sat collapsed beside her, and even from this distance, Marcus could see it was torn beyond repair. An old sedan, dust-caked and listing to one side, sat parked nearby on the dirt road. He watched her for several minutes, his jaw working thoughtfully. She'd prop up one board, then another would fall. She'd try to wedge a piece of plywood against a rock, and the wind would snatch it away. There was something determined in the way she kept trying, kept reaching for the next piece of scrap wood even as the structure collapsed again and again. No anger, no throwing things in frustration, just quiet, methodical persistence that spoke of someone who'd run out of options. Marcus knew that look. He'd seen it once in his own mirror decades ago, when his father had lost the ranch to debt and he'd been left with nothing but calloused hands and a stubborn refusal to quit. Someone had helped him then. Old Bill Hendricks, who'd given him work and a place to sleep until he could save enough to buy this land. The woman sat back on her heels, surveying her failed shelter. Even from a distance, Marcus could see her shoulders slump. She pulled a water bottle from her car, and he noticed how carefully she drank, how she made sure to screw the cap back on tight. Rationing. She was rationing water. He lowered the binoculars and looked toward his barn, visible in the distance, sturdy and red against the endless blue sky. His lumber pile sat under the overhang, good pine boards he'd bought last month for repairs he kept putting off. Behind him stretched 1,500 acres of land, a main house with 3 bedrooms standing mostly empty since his daughter moved to Phoenix, and a bunkhouse that hadn't seen use in 5 years. Marcus turned his horse away from the ridge and headed back toward the barn. The woman hadn't seen him watching. She was too focused on survival to notice the rancher on the distant hill. But he'd seen enough. He knew desperation when he saw it, and he knew something else too. He knew what it meant to be seen by someone who chose to look closer instead of looking away. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned with his truck loaded down with lumber, a toolbox rattling in the bed, and a large cooler of water. He drove slowly across the scrubland, giving her time to notice his approach, not wanting to startle her. When he pulled up, she was standing, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the other hanging loose at her side in a posture that tried for casual but couldn't quite hide the tension. "Afternoon," Marcus called out his window, keeping his voice easy, unthreatening. "Saw you might need some help." She stepped back slightly, and he could see her calculating. Fight or flight, trust or run. Her eyes flicked to his license plate, to his face, to the lumber in his truck bed. "I'm not trespassing," she said finally, her voice hoarse, probably from thirst or crying or both. "The fence is down here. I checked. This is public easement." "You're right about that," Marcus said, climbing out of his truck with deliberate slowness. He was 62, tall and lean, with sun-creased skin and hands that showed a lifetime of hard work. He kept his distance, sensing her wariness like you'd sense a spooked horse. "Not trying to run you off, but those boards you're working with, they're no good. Rotted through. Won't hold up against tonight's wind, and Weather Service says we're getting gusts up to 40 miles per hour. She glanced at her pile of scrap wood, then back at him. "I'll manage." "I expect you would try," Marcus said. "But I've got good lumber here going to waste. Pine boards, treated, and I've got nothing better to do this afternoon than help someone who needs it." He paused, then added quietly, "No strings. No payment." just one person helping another. She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the exact second she decided to take the risk. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, and she nodded once. "Okay, thank you." Her name was Elena, she told him as they worked. She didn't offer more, and Marcus didn't ask. He showed her how to set the corner posts deep enough to hold, how to brace the frame so the wind would flow around it instead of through it. She was a quick learner, anticipating the next step, holding boards steady without being told. Her hands were soft, office hands, but she didn't complain when the rough wood raised blisters. They worked mostly in silence, the kind that felt comfortable rather than awkward. When they finished, a solid shelter stood where chaos had been before. Not beautiful, but functional, with a slanted roof and walls that would break the wind. Marcus helped her secure a tarp over the top, showed her how to weight it down so it wouldn't tear away. "This will hold," he said, testing the main beam. "You've got good protection here now." Elena looked at the shelter, then at him. Her eyes were wet. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Marcus gathered his tools, taking his time with the answer. "Because someone did it for me once," he said finally, "and because sometimes the difference between making it and not making it is whether someone decides to help, instead of just driving by." Marcus returned to his ranch as the sun painted the desert orange and purple, but Elena's face stayed with him. The quiet desperation, the careful way she'd thanked him, the pride that kept her from asking for more even though she clearly needed it. He fed his horses and made himself dinner, but his mind kept wandering back to that shelter, to the woman alone on the edge of nowhere with a broken car and a determination that would only carry her so far. The next morning, he loaded up his truck again, this time with different cargo, a propane camping stove he'd stopped using years ago, canned goods from his pantry, gallons of fresh water, and an old sleeping bag rated for cold weather. He added work gloves, a first aid kit, and, after a moment's hesitation, a handwritten note with his phone number. "If you need anything," he wrote, "or if you're looking for work, the ranch always needs help." When he arrived at the shelter, Elena was sitting outside, attempting to brush her teeth with barely any water. She looked up, startled as he approached. "Brought some supplies," Marcus said, setting down the boxes. "Thought you could use them." She stood slowly, looking at the goods, then at him. "I can't pay you back." "Didn't ask you to." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "But if you're interested, I could use someone to help around the ranch. Fence repairs, stable work, general maintenance. Pay is fair, includes room and board in the bunkhouse. Nothing fancy, but it's warm, clean, and the door locks from the inside." Elena was quiet for so long Marcus thought she might refuse. Then she said, "My car broke down 3 days ago. I've been living in it for 2 months before that. I lost my job. Then my apartment, and Her voice cracked. "I've been trying so hard to figure it out on my own." "I know," Marcus said gently. "I can see that. And there's no shame in it. But you don't have to do it alone anymore, if you don't want to." She wiped her eyes roughly. "I'm a hard worker. I learn fast. I won't let you down. I believe you," Marcus said. And he did. He'd seen it in the way she'd kept trying with those broken boards, in the stubborn set of her jaw, in hands that kept working even through blisters. They packed her few belongings into his truck, and as they drove back toward the ranch, Elena stared out the window at the vast landscape. "Why?" she asked again, more softly this time. "Why reach out to someone you don't know?" Marcus considered the question, watching the road stretch out before them. "Because we're all one bad break away from needing help," he said finally. "And because the only thing that makes us human is choosing to see each other, really see each other, and deciding to care about what we see." He glanced at her. "You were building something from nothing out there. That takes courage. Seemed to me that kind of courage deserved a better chance. 6 months later, Elena would be managing the ranch's books and training a new mare Marcus had bought. A year later, she'd be taking college classes online and saving for her own place. But in that moment, driving across the desert with a stranger who'd chosen to be kind, she simply said, "Thank you," and meant it with every fiber of her being. And Marcus, who'd learned long ago that the measure of a life wasn't in acres owned, but in hands reached out, just nodded and drove them both toward home.